It was a real battle between the strongest mages of the White Tower and the demons from the demon realm. The demons were led by the supreme evil priest, while the magicians were under the orders of Oscar the Sage, a top-level magician who held the title of Master of the Tower of Mages. Oscar was able to defeat the demons with the help of his apprentices. But this victory came at a high price, taking the lives of countless students, those he cherished, and in the end was stabbed right through the heart. In the short time he had left, he managed to tell Edna to take care of his students. Even in the last moments of his life, he believed that although he was a great magician, but he had never been a good leader. With that regret in his heart, he passed away, and his exploits became part of history. Ein Spencer cautiously entered the room and noticed the leaf he had accidentally dropped gently descending on the sleeping Con Delon. Con woke up suddenly, jumping up abruptly and throwing the sheet off of him, completely unaware of what was happening. Out of surprise, Ein accidentally splashed the water he had prepared to change the compress right on himself, and froze in bewilderment. Irritated and wet, Ein rebuked Con for only intending to take care of him and change the wet towel. He also expressed his displeasure at Con's unpleasant sleeping habits, reproaching him for not even thanking him for his concern. Con Delon realized with concern that he had fallen asleep in a completely defenseless state, and this alarmed him greatly. He remembered that fateful moment and felt a sharp pain in his heart, thinking that he should have died by now. Memories of the high priest piercing his heart flashed before his eyes, filling his mind with panic and incomprehension. Suddenly, a powerful explosion shattered the front door, causing Con to turn around and freeze in shock. Standing on the threshold was an enraged man who commented wryly that Con was finally awake while Ein sat next to him in horror. The enraged mage was about to punish Con, ignoring Ein's attempts to stop him, for Con was still a patient. Confused and bewildered, Con asked Ein how he was still alive after that fatal blow. The mage said with caustic sarcasm that he too was surprised at the miraculous resurrection of Con, as he was clearly a member of the White Tower by the way he dressed. Ein asked the mage to explain the situation in more detail, but he did so carelessly, which infuriated him even more. The mage's eyes flashed with fury, and he demanded an explanation with an angry and threatening expression on his face. The enraged mage swung at Con with contempt, demanding that he beg and repent. Con reacted sharply, mistaking it for an attack, and thought that perhaps it was a demonic attempt on his life. He quickly activated the wind shield spell, and an air barrier instantly formed around him, protecting him from the blow. The mage irritatedly remarked to himself that Con was so weak that he hadn't even considered the possibility of deflecting the attack. The next moment, however, he was horrified to find that Kang's wind shield was suddenly dissipating. Con Delon looked at his hands in despair, realizing that his magic had become pathetic and completely useless. The satisfied mage, however, praised him for a good attempt at defense, realizing that Con hadn't been idle all this time. He decided to defer punishment for wasting research funds and told Con to focus on regaining his strength. Meanwhile, Ein couldn't believe that Kong had tried to use magic against an elder, thinking it was insane. Kong, on the other hand, was shocked to realize the pitiful state of his body, horrified at how weakened his magic channels and mana supply were. Kong Delon jumped out of bed and asked Ein in a panic what date today was, to which he calmly replied that it was September 21st, and Kong had only been unconscious for a day. A shocked Kong realized that according to his inner feelings, he had spent a whole 5 months in unconsciousness, and this completely confused him. He irritably ordered Ein to call Lloyd, or if he wasn't available, Gilly or Shasha to deal with the situation. Ein was puzzled that Con had mentioned the tower head's name so casually and wondered if Con's memory was so badly affected. When Ein reported that Lloyd Schultz had left the White Tower and joined the Red Tower, and that Gilead Dominic had escaped with a high-level magic book, Kong interrupted him furiously, unwilling to believe such ridiculous accusations. Kong froze in surprise, sensing that there wasn't the slightest fluctuation of magic around Ein, and it alarmed him. He was even more startled when he heard that Shasha had supposedly become the head of the tower, not understanding how such a young girl could hold such a high position. Ein scratched the back of his head in confusion, not understanding why Con had only mentioned her age, leaving out a full 20 years of her accomplishments. Kong irritably thought that some mages had too much imagination, looking at the carefree and cheerful Ein. However, in the next second, he suddenly stopped, realizing that even though it was ridiculous, Ein's words sounded too natural and convincing. Kong froze, staring out the window, trying to realize what exactly he was seeing right now. Shock overwhelmed him as he realized that the world outside the window had completely changed during his absence. Struggling to settle into his chair, Kong finally recognized a frightening truth to himself. He was 20 years in the future. The streets of the city now looked completely different: bright lights, tall buildings, and people living completely new lives. He was puzzled by the strange shining streetlights and the amazing mechanisms called automobiles. Kong DeLon looked thoughtfully at the happy people outside the window, realizing that all these incredible changes were due to the revolution of magical technology. Regret echoed painfully inside him, for those he had lost would surely have been happy to see such a world. He touched his finger to the glass, remembering a time when the world was falling apart and people had stopped believing in the future. Kong decided that enough of wallowing in memories and it was time to figure out who the owner of his current body had become. His name was Oscar Crushen, a 20-year-old level 1 mage from a noble family that had lost its position, and as he assessed Oscar's appearance, Kong smiled slightly, noting that he looked not bad at all. However, Kang's smile quickly disappeared when he realized that Oscar was completely talentless as a mage, remaining only at the first level even at the age of 20. It turned out that Oscar had spent a huge amount of money on an illegal elixir to increase his magic power. After taking it, his body almost collapsed. Kong quickly put the facts together and realized why he had been unconscious for a whole day. The side effect of the elixir should have killed Oscar instantly. Suddenly, Kong felt an unusual tingling sensation and was surprised to find a strange glowing seal on his body. The mana inside him was too much for a level 1 mage, and Kong wondered anxiously what this seal was and where he was getting so much energy from. Kong concentrated and noticed that there was a huge mass of pure, unprocessed mana inside of him, clearly left over from taking that questionable elixir. He was surprised to notice something extraneous suddenly appearing in that energy, a small patch of dark substance. Trying to make sense of it, he watched anxiously as this dark mass began to rapidly expand, causing strange changes on his skin. Kong jerked his hand away sharply as a drop of the substance fell onto the table and immediately began to eat away at the surface, realizing with horror that it was poison. Confused, he wondered why there was poison in Oscar's body and who could have been behind it. Kong finally realized the big picture of what was happening and realized the situation he was in. With a slight smile, he recognized that the illegal elixir was genuine and a truly rare commodity, unavailable even for a lot of money. The only problem was that Oscar Crushen didn't even realize the presence of the deadly poison in the elixir. Realizing the magnitude of the danger, Kong concluded that the previous owner of this body had not died because of a surge of mana. It was the poison secretly added to the expensive and rare elixir that had caused his death. Kong thoughtfully noted that the level of poison in the elixir was too high, and an ordinary level 1 mage had no chance of surviving. A gleam of excitement appeared in his eyes as he realized that it was only through his own experience that he was able to detect traces of poison. It was unclear to him who had decided to play such a cruel joke on his soul and why, but in the end, he was given an incredible second chance at life. Kong confidently picked up the vial of poisoned elixir, pondering how he should proceed. With a slight smirk, he recognized the new life as the perfect opportunity to finally live for himself. With a smile, Kong promised Oscar Cruchon that in gratitude for his body, he would be sure to avenge his death. Meanwhile, on the outskirts of Surin, in a mansion, a man nicknamed Boss learned disturbing news from a subordinate. The subordinate reported that their store had been completely destroyed from the inside by some mage, which made Boss furious. He angrily slammed the bottle on the table and demanded an explanation as to who dared to go against him. The subordinate cautiously suggested that the mage might have been Oscar Crushen, but the boss flatly refused to believe it, considering Oscar a weak theorist on the verge of death. The subordinate anxiously remarked that if the White Tower started an investigation, unpleasant details about Oscar's poisoning might come to light. He reminded the boss that the person who had ordered the crime against Oscar was one of the White Tower's mages, who had a distinctive ring shining on his hand. Boss's face contorted in horror and he jumped to his feet when an unexpected guest suddenly appeared in the room. It was Kong, who had entered under the name Oscar Crushen, surrounded by a strong magical aura. Kong calmly stated that he had traced the residual odor from the bottle and now knew there were far more people involved in this case than he had anticipated. The boss, stunned, asked Oscar if he was the one who had ruined his store, to which he calmly confirmed the hunch. Oscar smiled ironically, noting that he would listen to their conversation with interest, since it was already clear to him that they were involved in his murder. The boss's eyes flashed with rage, and he grimly ordered his subordinate to kill Oscar immediately. The subordinate instantly rushed to the attack with knife in hand, carrying out his master's order. But Oscar only chuckled coldly, warning that if the opponents decided to play rough, he wasn't going to hold back his strength either. Oscar instantly used the Wind Blade spell, and the swift strike mercilessly slashed the attacker. The subordinate's body fell to the floor, and his head separated from his body and rolled, causing Oscar only mild irritation. He remarked with cold calmness that the scene reminded him of the fate of the high priest, who had once died in the same way. Boss, stunned and enraged by the death of his assistant Bart, shouted his name loudly, gripped by panic. Enraged and desperate, Boss pulled out his gun, pointing it directly at Oscar, preparing to shoot. The shots flew toward Oscar, but he didn't even move, watching the approaching bullets with interest. A slight smile appeared on Oscar's face as he noted that he had never seen a weapon like this before and called it pretty interesting. He calmly activated the wind shield spell, completely stopping all the bullets in the air, causing the boss to be shocked. He noted with curiosity that he couldn't sense any magic in this weapon, and wondered how it could be so powerful. With a chuckle, Oscar sent the bullets back at the boss, not about to spare his enemy after such a crude attempt to kill him. The bullets pierced the boss' shoulder and body, causing him to cry out in pain and collapse to the floor. Oscar calmly stepped on his head, noting that none of his subordinates would come to his aid as the room was protected by magic. The boss, gasping in pain, couldn't believe that a mage of such a low level was able to use a spell that blocked level 5 sounds. Settling back in his chair, Oscar coldly demanded the injured man to give the name of the person who ordered his death. But barely had the boss tried to refuse to answer when he received a hard kick to the face, silencing him. With a cold sneer, Oscar praised the boss for his pride, noting that he clearly valued it above his own life. With icy calmness, he channeled wind magic right inside his opponent's body, causing him to feel unbearable pain. The boss fell to the floor and began squirming painfully, feeling as if thousands of needles were tearing his body from the inside. Oscar watched his agony with complete indifference, sure that now he was ready to speak. He tiredly remarked that he did not like torture, as it always made too much noise, and demanded at last the name of the customer. The boss, begging for mercy and shaking with fear, agreed to tell Oscar everything he knew. Oscar finally let him go and, holding back his impatience, demanded the name and details of the customer immediately. In a trembling voice, the boss admitted that the customer was dressed in a dark cloak and offered a lucrative deal of elixir and money that was impossible to refuse. He couldn't see the customer's face, however, as he hid it under a hood, though he clearly wore the White Tower Mage's ring. Oscar frowned, realizing that the ring was most likely a clever trick to confuse the performers. Oscar carefully took the documents from the boss, revealing the information about the White Tower first. He scrutinized the pages, and his eyes glazed over at the news. White Tower had the worst financial performance among the 4 towers. He remembered that he had once provided Edna with documents to prevent this from happening, but now his doubts gnawed at him. Determined to find out what was going on, Oscar demanded that the boss list the businesses of all 4 major magic towers. He nodded obediently, albeit fearfully, and was afraid to even look Oscar in the eye. Oscar looks with interest at the documents listing the accomplishments of the other towers. He learns that the Yellow Tower of the East ushered in the magical engineering era with lightning and created streetlights and automobiles. The Blue Tower of the South developed the business of drinking water, agriculture, and potions, and the Red Tower of the West joined the army and participated in monster-slaying missions. Oscar asks about the White Tower, expecting a serious answer. When he hears that the White Tower is in the delivery business, he stares at his interlocutor in utter confusion. Oscar can barely contain his facepalm upon hearing that the White Tower is in the business of delivering items. He's shocked when he realizes that it's a courier service with wind riders. The White Tower mages flying through the sky were once considered symbols of freedom and bravery, comparable to dragons and eagles. Now it's all been reduced to a delivery business, and Oscar can't believe that he, the former head of the tower, is the one who started it. With a blank stare, he admits, "So that's who set it up. My own students." Oscar is confused. Since when did drinking water and farming become the basis of the tower's income? He learns that the Blue Tower has monopolized the potions market, even though it used to be the White Tower. Now it even sells pure water at inflated prices and causes rain in arid regions. Oscar has a hard time understanding why anyone would pay for water when they can get it from a well. He snorts at the absurdity of it. For the sake of a couple of coins, they play out whole plays, while the interlocutor only laughs awkwardly. Oscar ponders how the White Tower is lagging far behind the others in terms of income, and how important the upcoming night fair will be. The merchant is squirming on the floor, begging for help, while Oscar coldly considers whether to save him after the information he's received. He picks up a folder of accounting reports, wondering if he's dying of blood loss. He flips through the files and is amazed. Arson, assault, extortion, even murder orders. Oscar dismissively says that he is just a pile of manure on legs, and turns his back. Oscar stares at the unconscious merchant lying there in silence before quietly walking away across the balcony. He walks out into the cool night, thinking aloud that the man should have been a good man in his next life. The Tower of White Magic rises in the distance, illuminated by moonlight. Oscar returns home, barely able to move his legs, and enters his room with difficulty. As he sinks into his chair, he thinks with annoyance how weak this body is, having been drained by only a couple of spells. Oscar doubts whether in his current state he can use the very magic that once made him the greatest mage in history. He activates the Wind Archive spell, but it dissipates almost immediately, leaving him disappointed. With a heavy sigh, he admits that he is unable to use it yet. He decides to start with a basic body scan to get a handle on his condition. While the magic analyzes, Oscar picks up one of the books, intending to learn everything he can about the body he was reborn into. My memories are a mess, but Frank still told me something important. If I want to save this body, I need to know everything about Oscar Crushen. He was Count Crushen's heir and the sole survivor of the mansion fire. The magical community recognized him as a genius from an early age, competing for the opportunity to train him. In 6 years at the Empire's Magical Academy, he had never once received a grade lower than the highest. So why was someone with such abilities still at the first level? That's why his fate was so tragic. If it wasn't for the mana deficiency syndrome, he could have been the greatest wizard of his generation. Mana deficiency syndrome? That explains why he never rose higher. He knows more about magic than anyone else, but he can't use it. Scan complete. After confirming the results, Oscar was shocked. It's not a disease. Someone had deliberately sealed his magic circuit. The system identified it as mana deficiency syndrome. Normally, with such a syndrome, a mage couldn't develop his body and level up. But in Oscar's case, it was different. His case was special. His physical circuit wasn't originally warped, it had been deliberately linked by someone. If Oscar really was a genius, he would have realized that he didn't have mana deficiency syndrome. Too bad he didn't leave a diary, it could explain a lot. According to Frank, Oscar was an alcoholic. What if, it was just an image created on purpose? Oscar realized that someone had overridden his magical circuit and was plotting to kill him. He realized that the person was deliberately pretending to be a catcher to confuse everyone. In a world where you couldn't trust, you had to break the chains yourself. He, unlike that mage, only had to untangle the knot. But as he delved deeper into the books, something immediately set him off. Oscar pulled out a book with an unusual title. It was dedicated to rethinking basic magic. Leafing through the pages, he saw a bunch of notes, edits and magic diagrams, clearly left by someone with an unconventional approach. One of the formulas caught his eye instantly. His eyes widened like someone who had suddenly found a key. The schematics were reinterpreting the magic of the windshield, turning an ordinary defense into a potential weapon. Oscar noted with admiration that the concept was very different from the traditional and opened up a whole new approach. Oscar noticed that the author of the book described how to adapt the spells to any situation and even created his own magic. He realized that he couldn't use the spells in practice, but he did hundreds of experiments in his mind. His approach to theory was so similar to Oscar's thinking that it was clear, this really was a genius. One look at the book was enough for Oscar to realize this without a doubt. And although the author couldn't cast magic, he didn't give up, he just loved magic more than anyone else. In the message on the last page, the mage hoped that this book would move the White Tower forward at least a little. Oscar realized that the author knew everything, realized everything, and deliberately went to his most difficult step. He had accepted loneliness as a price. There was no one else who would have traveled this path beside him. Oscar said his name quietly, bowing in respect before his willpower and genius. The young mage, struck down by fate, had not fallen, but had chosen solitude to continue the journey. Oscar sank heavily onto the couch, digesting what he had read and inwardly preparing himself for a decision. He swore in Master Derek Sage's name that he would untie the very knot his predecessor had failed to handle. His magic flared, and he promised that he would punish those who had cruelly clipped the wings of genius. When he woke up, he was surprised to realize that he was in a greenhouse, not remembering how he got here. He remembered how he'd fallen asleep from exhaustion, trying to unlock the magic circuit, when suddenly someone called out to him. Oscar thought about it, his gaze becoming detached. Something was pulling him back into the depths of his memories. Meanwhile, the tutor and his students were teaching in the greenhouse, turning it into an open-air classroom. He realized that the reason for everything was the curse of dreams imposed by the demonic world. Every time he fell asleep, the past came back in front of his eyes like an open wound. Although he had expected the curse to disappear with the new body, it turned out that it was firmly bound to the soul, not the shell. Oscar mentally noted that his students' dreams remained clear and was glad he hadn't passed his pain on to them. Lloyd reminded them that today they were to study the magic system and its main categories. The mentor confirmed, all magic is divided into 4 types: amplification, acceleration, balance and special forms. Lloyd, a 9-year-old student, clarified that the White Tower specialized in harmony magic, and that was correct. 5-year-old Shasha asked with interest if each tower had its own preference, and learned, yes, each magic has a different nature. The teacher told her that the Golden Tower values speed, it is the magic of acceleration, and the Red Tower values strength, and thus amplification. 7-year-old Gilead enthusiastically stated that he liked acceleration because he hated slowness. Shasha wondered if she could choose magic, but her mentor explained, the type is innate, you can't change it. He suggested she try a simple spell, and she concentrated on performing it curiously. After a couple seconds, a faint magical pulse burst from the girl's fingertip. She exclaimed in surprise that something was appearing. The mentor explained that Shashi's magic was balanced and safe, she was of the harmonious type. Hearing that she looked like a wizard, the girl smiled happily and admitted that she even liked it. Gilead eagerly wanted to try it himself, jumping in place with excitement. He turned out to be a speeding wizard, just as he had dreamed, and made no secret of his delight at his result. When it was Lloyd's turn, his magical flower bloomed, and his mentor noticed with interest that he was a special type. Lloyd asked if it was possible to change the type of magic, for he liked the balance better, like his teacher. The mentor explained with a smile that special types were extremely rare and impossible to change. He admitted that Lloyd was the one he was going to give the most individualized instruction. When Lloyd heard this, he was a little confused and asked if he was the one who would get the most attention. The teacher confirmed that special mages couldn't cope without a mentor, and Lloyd immediately changed his mind. Now he wouldn't mind being special if there were more lessons. Oscar laughed, agreeing to Lloyd's terms, and called him a trickster. He remembered how the boy's nickname, the Promise Man, had stuck. Despite his adult reasoning, Lloyd was still a child at heart. Suddenly the alarm went off, interrupting the morning silence in the tower. Oscar lifted himself lazily from the couch, hearing the announcement coming from the broadcast room. Oscar woke up from his nap when he heard the call to lab number 4202 and wondered how long he had slept. As he stepped out of the elevator, he noted that he had already unlocked 12 of his 20 physical circuits and had become a level 2 mage. He thought ironically, how unexpectedly satisfying it was to become a level 2, considering where he'd started. A man met him in the lab and inquired about his condition, noting that his memory was beginning to return. Oscar confirmed that it was, and the man smiled in relief, pleased with the progress. Oscar was surprised to realize that Maxim, the White Tower elder, used to be his junior. He remembered how the latter had come to the tower years after him, and was now a respected mage himself. In the past, Maxim had followed him everywhere, calling him senior and then master of the tower, which Oscar thought was cute. Now that Maxim is in his 40s, his strength speaks for itself, he's grown stubborn and honest. But suddenly the conversation is interrupted by news. The head of the Gordon family and the acting leader have been murdered. Oscar is asked a direct question about the report, but he answers evasively, hinting that the murder had a good reason. Then Maxim stated sharply, it was because they were trying to kill him themselves. He handed over a dossier that listed the order, the poisoned elixir, and the fee for the assassination attempt. Maxim confirmed, he had come to them with a conversation, and they had immediately tried to eliminate him. He tossed a bag of gold on the table and dryly added that with such an amount, the deed was clearly official. Maxim stated that the book detailed the details of the assassination contract, and he recognized it as self-defense on Oscar's part. Oscar thanked him and cautiously asked for one personal favor. He wanted to meet with the Tower Master, and Maxim readily agreed, for Oscar had often discussed magic with Shasha. However, it turned out that the meeting would not be possible until 6 months later, not before the White Night Festival. Oscar was shocked at the timing and couldn't contain his surprise. He obviously hadn't expected such a delay. It was explained to Oscar that the Tower Master was away on an urgent errand and the meeting was delayed because of that. He was amazed, why such an important figure was dealing with such small matters, but the reason was the absence of the senior mage. Maxim admitted that the situation was awkward, because the master personally takes on tasks only in emergencies. When Oscar asked her what level she had reached, the answer was level 7, which was quite modest for her age. Meanwhile, the report mentioned that the cut on the dead man's body was too clean, and Maxim suspected that Oscar had been practicing battle magic again. Oscar replied calmly, he only practiced when he really wanted to. Maxim let him go, but at that moment a new guest entered the room, the vice master of the tower, Hamel. With a slight smile, Hamel admitted that he wanted to ask him not to be too hard on Oscar, but it seemed he was too late. He explained that he was worried about the boy, since he had brought him here himself, and he couldn't help but keep an eye on him. Maxim thought, even if it was basic magic, one couldn't learn it in a day. Oscar was obviously practicing secretly and diligently. Maxim thought with a smile that Oscar was learning much harder than it seemed at first glance. Then he went with Hamel to the elders' meeting, where Fidelina was already waiting for them. Meanwhile, Oscar went up to the 10th floor. He had seen the students in his dream and decided to go into the greenhouse. It was noticeably quieter and emptier there, and it filled him with a slight sadness. Suddenly a gardener approached him, calling him by name, but Oscar was wary, he didn't know who it was. The stranger introduced himself as Whiteheller, the manager of the tower and its household, noticing that Oscar clearly had no recollection of their conversations. Oscar was shocked at how much word had spread about his memory loss, and Whiteteller only laughed. When he referred to him as young Sir Oscar, he asked in surprise who he meant. It turned out that Whiteteller had worked here under the former head, the great Sir Oscar, whom he knew personally. Smiling, Oscar decided to use that distinction too and asked Whiteteller to stay as his interlocutor. Whitler thanked him for the offer, but admitted that he would be leaving the tower soon, which surprised Oscar. He explained that he'd been here for 40 years, had 3 heads and was the last one in his department. The reason he had held on all this time was the words of the previous head of the tower. Oscar Sage had said at the time that everyone in the tower was important and should be proud of their role. Whitler admitted that he had since worked with the idea that he himself was part of the White Tower. Oscar was touched by Whiteteller's words and thanked him, but he suddenly announced that he was quitting his job. Surprised, Oscar asked again, and Whiteteller explained, "The tower is in decline, especially evident in the state of the facilities." He frankly admitted that finances were tight and that next month would be the 40th anniversary of his tenure. Oscar immediately realized it was because of the seniority award given to White Tower employees other than mages. According to the rules, after 40 years of service, you can get 200,000 bells, enough to buy a house. Whiteteller honestly admits that the White Tower can't afford to pay such an award right now. To raise that money, others would have to risk their lives taking on dangerous errands. He can't accept it, even if he wanted to. The tower has become a second home to him. Oscar is shocked. He had no idea the situation was so dire. He remembers how he used to condemn Azure Tower's actions, but now he is no longer sure who he is to judge. After all, those he criticized were at least making a profit. Oscar clenches his fist, realizing the bitter truth. He only has titles with no real benefit behind them. He mentally laments. The titles of war hero and savior of mankind are worthless if they can't provide worthwhile rewards for those who have served the tower for decades. Whitler calls out to Oscar worriedly, seeing his sudden reaction. He wonders why he clenched his fist so hard and sees blood on his hand. When Oscar questions the timeline, Whiteteller calmly replies, "He'll be gone in 2 weeks." Oscar carefully bandages Whiteteller's hand and asks him to be sure to apply the ointment in the infirmary. He confesses that he hopes he will continue to be his interlocutor despite his plans to leave. But Whitler, unexpectedly, tells him that he's not going to leave because there's a way out. Oscar looks forward with confidence and promises that he will do his best. And a moment later, already sitting alone in his office, he is confused, thinking, "I said that. But how the hell do I do it?" Oscar runs through ideas, lectures, studies, commissions, but none of them promise a quick buck. He realizes that the only way is potions, though he sighs in hopelessness. Suddenly his gaze clings to the paper, and his eyes go wide with surprise. He rises abruptly, realizing this. The material he has found astounds him. At this time, in the office of the Deputy Tower Master, someone whispers indignantly, "This is a waste. I can't ignore it anymore." Fidenlina, the Tower Elder and Guardian of the Finances, sternly demands an answer, but what? Her indignation grows. She cannot calmly accept the theft, even if the damage is small. Fidenlina holds back her fury when Maxim dismisses it by saying that there is nothing to steal in the tower. She demands the isolation of the guilty party, but Maxim argues, thinking it pointless. He takes the cup with a slight sigh. Isolation is too harsh a measure, he'd rather be trained otherwise. Hamel calmly says that isolation would only be torture for the child and suggests a milder solution. Fidenlina immediately offers to charge him for the resources used, to which Hamel responds with a sigh. She admits that the situation is critical. The tower is woefully short of money. Fidenlina reasoned that if she sold the potions equipment, the tower would last another 3 months. But Hamel firmly refuses. For him it is unacceptable, even if there is almost no money left. Hamel reminds him that the magic tower is a place where mages learn and exchange knowledge. He argues, if you close yourself off from the world, there will be no fresh air, and therefore no development. His voice is full of doubt. He asks himself if the tower even has a future. Fidenlina is outraged. They have waited 20 years and have had no results. She is tired of waiting. But Hamel remains steadfast. Even if there is now a genius to save the tower, he is not prepared to compromise its principles. Hamel looks sadly into his tea and admits that no one else will come to them. He wants to say something, but his voice betrays him. His emotions are too strong. Fidenlina asks irritably who is disrupting their meeting, but Hamel tells them to come in. A smiling Oscar enters the room and introduces himself with unexpected confidence. He addresses everyone and says that he has come with a proposal that will probably change everything. Oscar confidently asks for permission to open a business, which shocks everyone in the room. Fidenlina sarcastically recalls the recent embezzlement incident and laughs at the idea. Oscar calmly explains that he found an article about a flu outbreak that caused an entire estate to go into lockdown. Hamill confirms that it could be the rare Cadena flu causing panic among the people. He adds that there is no longer a cure for it. The vaccine recipe was lost 20 years ago. Oscar confidently declares that he wants to start by selling the Cadena flu vaccine, which confuses everyone. He explains that the White Tower once had a monopoly on the drug and intends to reclaim it. Fidenlina dismisses his idea as absurd and unworthy of even discussing. She reminds him that all the magical towers and pharmaceutical companies have tried unsuccessfully to recreate the vaccine for the past 20 years. With doubt and irritation, she asks how Oscar, a 20-year-old rookie, can manage what no one else has managed. Oscar calmly admits that he is 20 years old, but adds, he is a genius, unlike everyone who has tried before him. With a smug smile, he states this to Fidenlina's face, leaving no doubt about his confidence. Fidenlina is furious, her face contorted with anger. She can barely contain herself. She screams, accusing Oscar of embezzling over 700,000 bells and buying illegal drugs. Outraged, she doubts his sanity until she is interrupted by his name. The rector calmly explains that Oscar is offering an official investment opportunity as a White Tower mage. Fidenlina, realizing she overreacted, reluctantly apologizes. Oscar reflects to himself. He has realized that the reason for her irritation is her position as treasurer. He admits that nothing of significance has happened over the past 2 years for that body, but confidently asks her to consider his offer. Inwardly, he emphasizes, the previous owner of this body and he now are two completely different people. Oscar asks to see the second page of the newspaper and hints that that is where the clue lies. The rector reads an article about Archbishop Baldwin's pilgrimage and is surprised. He stayed in Surin for a month. According to the statutes of the Order of El Terra, their representatives do not stay in cities for long. In fact, to become a cardinal, they need huge funds. The spiritual path has long turned into a financial race. Formally, the pilgrimage is limited to a month, but in fact the archbishops collect donations from rich people. The city of Surin was once significant, but has now lost its former glory. The rector agrees. The place does seem an odd place to pray. Oscar points out, blessings for the sake of a barren land sound ridiculous. He reminds us that the order had a well-defined pilgrimage itinerary. And instead of the next destination, Vince, the archbishop stays in Surin. The archbishop stayed in Nox for a month before arriving in Cyrene. Oscar concludes that he is avoiding a visit to Vince at all costs. If a disaster occurs during a pilgrimage, it is considered the wrath of the goddess. So the archbishop knew about the flu outbreak in Vince and was stalling for time, hoping it would subside. Fidenlina admits that Oscar has a knack for analysis, worthy of a theory mage, even if it's only a hypothesis for now. Oscar is pleased that his suggestion has been understood, but the vice master immediately lambasts him. He explains that official support is impossible, or there won't be enough funds for the other mages. Oscar gets upset, but the vice master continues, he is ready to invest his personal money. Fidenlina is shocked by such an act, tries to object. But the vice master only laughs and says it's okay. Oscar tenses up, hoping for support, but they calmly explain to him that although his efforts are understandable, he will not receive official sponsorship. He is confused, as he had hoped for the council's approval, but is faced with the cold reality and limitations of the system. The old man explains that if they support him, they will have to cut resources to other mages, and they can't do that. However, contrary to expectations, he suddenly offers to invest his own money in the project, showing that he personally believes in Oscar's potential. Arya is stunned by this gesture, but the old man only laughs, as if hinting that if the tower can't see the obvious, he will do it himself. Oscar specifies the amount, 30,000 bells, and he himself realizes that this is paltry for a large-scale project. Shock and annoyance overwhelm him. With such resources, a full-fledged development is out of the question. In the potions lab, he literally grabs his head. The budget is ruining the entire original plan. Without wasting any time, he switches to a backup option. The equipment is usable, so it is possible to act in a different way. He decides to create a sample vaccine and get funding from the archbishop, because he is the one who suffers the most from the epidemic. Oscar decides with a cold chuckle that money is the easiest thing to get out of desperate people, especially when the stakes are high. He rolls up his sleeves enthusiastically, excited to begin the alchemical play in which he is the lead actor. His eyes flash as the ingredients begin to react, a process requiring extreme concentration. The potion is bubbling, radiating magical energy. Every step is well thought out, every movement honed to the point of automatism. He deftly pours the tincture without losing a drop, for it is this potion that will be his ticket to big finance. Oscar takes off his glasses and with a slight smile assesses the result. The potion is decent, everything is going according to plan. He recalls the saying about masters who keep style even in small things, and examines the infusion with satisfaction. Meanwhile, the assistant drags the bags of herbs on his back, complaining loudly about his back and hoping it was worth it. Oscar confirms that everything is packed and nonchalantly informs him that he has a potion for fatigue, just in time. Guy is relieved to accept the bottle and thanks, not realizing that he has just become the first tester of the potion. The boy is pleased. The potion is warm and fresh, it is pleasant to drink, and even his face glows with pleasure. Oscar evaluates the quality of the herbs and recognizes that the ingredients have been chosen skillfully, perfectly. He chuckles, noting that he looks more like a merchant than a magician with such commercial acumen. Suddenly he gets a slap on the head for making a careless joke about the tower he'd hinted at selling. He covers his head in panic, and Oscar explains guiltily that he couldn't help himself, because the tower is not to be touched. Fran wonders what to do now, referring to the older woman's order to help Oscar so that he doesn't have to do it alone. Oscar remembers how Fidelina greeted him coldly at first, but still sent him help, and smiles slightly sarcastically. He takes the sack, thinking he could have done it himself, but since help had come, he would not refuse. Oscar reasons that the White Tower is full of gifted but difficult students, and if they could unite, the tower would flourish. He remembers that Franz Sirius is one of those students, and decides to test to see what this troubled genius is worth. Franz is surprised to notice that almost all the herbs he has bought are poisonous, and begins to question his choice. He names them: black lily of the valley, red camellias, ghost mushrooms and merva leaves. The mixture looks dangerous. Oscar explains that even poison can become medicine if you know how to properly handle and prepare it. However, the usual boiling method draws out not only the toxins but also the beneficial substances. The result loses potency. He suddenly asks about dumplings, reminding me that they are cooked in a steamer, hinting at an alternative way of processing herbs. Oscar explains that the steamer will preserve almost all the nutrients, something that cannot be achieved by conventional boiling. He specifies that this method can preserve up to 98% of the properties of ingredients, an idea that could change the potions market. Franz is delighted, but Oscar lambasts him. This is only the first step, which softens the ingredients before the real detoxification. The process begins. The herbs are enveloped in steam, and the preparation for the extraction of toxins goes perfectly. At this point, magic is activated, Dr. Lamdian, and Oscar activates the spell, drawing out the poisons without touching a single bit of goodness. Oscar gathers the toxic vapor into a sphere, emphasizing to separate the poisons from the rest of the vapors. Franz watches in amazement. He urges them to watch carefully, for now the key step is underway, the magical extraction of the harmful substances. Oscar then mixes the purified vapor with the exact proportion of ingredients: 23% red camellia, 47% myrrh leaves. The output is a clear vial of the finished Cadena flu cure, glowing with healing energy. Oscar holds the potion out to Franz and offers to repeat it, as if the whole thing were a matter of a couple of minutes rather than an alchemical feat. Franz panics. He doesn't even know how to use two spells at once, but he can't just admit that to Oscar. He tries to activate air drain, and Oscar notices, mana control is unstable, but it's quite bearable for a novice. However, that's where it ends. Franz is exhausted, the spell goes out, and he doesn't realize what went wrong. He embarrassedly admits that he can't cast two spells in a row and feels that Oscar is teasing him. Franz excuses himself that he's only third level, but Oscar calmly offers, "Let me teach you." Franz is dumbfounded. Is Oscar really going to teach him the secret technique of double cast? Oscar explains the principle: mentally divide the mind into two parts, where each will control a separate spell. Franz isn't quite sure, but agrees to try it. There's nothing to lose anyway, and it's a rare chance. He concentrates, and the energy spirals into a spiral. The attempt to split the mind is working. Oscar applauds and Franz is shocked. He has just mastered the double cast, and it was surprisingly easy. Franz is outraged. Why was such a simple technique hidden? He thought it was something incredibly complicated. Oscar calmly replies, "Because the elders are greedy and don't want to share for free what they've learned the hard way." He adds that on a real battlefield, such insularity is a liability and knowledge transfer should be mandatory. The tower needs a new approach: sharing, live learning and supporting each other, especially among apprentices. Franz successfully completes the potion, and Oscar praises him for his talent and honestly admits that he didn't expect him to do it right the first time. Franz is embarrassed to thank Oscar. He explained everything so clearly that it was hard not to understand, even if he was angry at first. He happily gets back to work, as there are still a lot of ingredients to prepare and no time to relax. Announcing that he has a bigger steamer, he offers to speed up the process and extract everything at once. A few hours later, Franz rolls off his feet, exhausted after brewing 514 bottles in a row, but pleased with the result. Suddenly a man bursts into the lab with panic on his face. "Oscar, we have a problem." And the tension immediately rises. A letter informs him that the pharmaceutical company from Azure Tower has already sent a delegation to Archbishop Baldwin. Oscar realizes, they're too late, the competitors weren't just stalling, they had a clear and quick plan. The man in white suggests that if those have already signed the contract, Oscar's potions may be useless. Franz faints, but Oscar keeps a cool head and says that luck is a matter of strategy, not chance. He recalls, the Cadena flu is classified as a rank B disaster, which means they still have a way to play higher. Oscar confidently suggests an alternative, and the man in white reacts instantly. Is it really true? In the background, a building is shown in Cyrene, where things appear to be just beginning. There is a knock at the Archbishop's door. The very guests in question have arrived. Baldwin, still calm, allows them in, obviously expecting important negotiations. The representatives of the Azure Tower enter the room, Level 5 Mage Moira Main and new tech director Niall Bryan, competitors who act quickly and cold-bloodedly. Moira politely thanks the Archbishop and sits down, preparing for a diplomatic conversation. Baldwin inquires about progress on developing a cure for the Cadena flu, expecting to hear of success. Moira confirms with a smile, everything is on track, but so far they have only begun the clinical trial phase. Neil adds that with successful results, they will receive approval from the Imperial Medicines Agency. However, Moira admits the obvious, the trials will take time and a quick launch is not possible, which is a little discouraging to the Archbishop. When Moira promises to complete everything in 6 months, the Archbishop literally jumps up. His trip is in 4 months, and that's too long. He is furious, he has limited time, and the Azure Tower's slowness is undermining his entire schedule. In the midst of a tense conversation, he is informed that another mage has arrived, and he demands to be let in immediately. Moira is at a loss, their delegation is fully assembled, no third person they were expecting. The whole room freezes in anticipation, and the Archbishop exclaims irritably, "Then who is it?" And the intrigue reaches a peak. The door slowly opens, and Oscar enters the room calmly, saying coldly, "LCIA, the formal greeting of the order." With a polite smile, he introduces himself, Oscar Crushen, a second-level mage from the White Tower. Inside he holds back the tension, but in his eyes he reads confidence, he has not come for nothing. As Moira and Neil confusedly make excuses for the two of them, the Archbishop looks at the newcomer with surprise. "Then who is it?" comes the question as Oscar quietly prepares to voice his game-changing proposal. Oscar enters confidently, remembering the order's traditional greeting LCIA, and uses it with the intention of making an impression. He politely introduces himself, "I am Oscar Crushen, a second-level mage from the White Tower," while maintaining the perfect diplomatic tone. With a slight half-smile, he informs, "I come with good news," already sensing the atmosphere in the room changing. The Archbishop is wary, and the Azure Tower representatives are perplexed. Why would such a low-ranking mage show up? But Oscar does not hesitate to state, "I'm here about the sale of a cure for the Cadena flu," and everyone's attention is immediately drawn to him. Oscar calmly remarks that he seems to have come at just the right time. After all, everyone is here for the same reason. The Archbishop is restrained, but makes it clear that the representatives of the Azure Tower are not ready to negotiate. Moira jumps in, accusing Oscar of lying, saying that the White Tower has neither the money nor the technology to create a cure. The Archbishop asks for clarification of the last name, and Oscar clearly answers, "Crushen," thus confirming his affiliation. With these words, he places a wooden box on the table and adds firmly, "Who would dare lie to the Archbishop of the Order of El Terra?" Oscar opens the box and calmly says, "This is a sample," placing an elegant vial of medicine on the table. The Archbishop gets straight to the point. If negotiations begin, how many copies can they produce and in what time frame? Moira, dumbfounded, flares up with rage, accusing the Archbishop of bias, although he himself came without proof. The realization of the situation silences him as the Archbishop silently looks at him with a cold sneer. In a desperate attempt to turn the tide, Moira asks, "Did you even get approval from the Imperial office?" To which Oscar calmly replies, "No." Moira states with a smug smirk that the White Tower is no different from their organization, and brags about their powerful manufacturing base. Oscar looks at him silently, then calmly reminds him that they are now talking about the White Tower, about their experience and reputation. As if offhand, he clarifies that he's calling Azure Tower ancient, in the presence of a White Tower mage, and it sounds like a taunt. Moira immediately boils up, demanding that he take it back immediately, his face twisted with anger. But Oscar only chuckles and asks, "Did I say something wrong? Which tower was founded first, according to continental history. And adds with a sneer, do you really want to argue over a difference of 5 years? Oscar looks at the tower with a cold stare and notes with a chuckle that 5 years isn't enough to erase the difference that centuries have tried to hide. Moira smiles wryly and says that it's just history, that everyone has forgotten who used to own the potions market. But his objections sound less and less confident, especially when he realizes he's talking to the wrong person. The next moment, a wave of pressure sweeps through the room. Moira stops talking abruptly, feeling her hair stand on end. Oscar turns his back to them and says coldly, so that's how you take it, and a thought flashes through Moira's mind. This guy is clearly not a level 2, no way. Moira turns around in annoyance, but before she can say anything, a messenger bursts into the room with an emergency message. He hands the phone to the Archbishop, explaining that Lord Vince himself is on the line. Everyone in the room freezes as the Archbishop listens, then repeats in amazement, Elsia, thank you for your immense kindness. He perplexedly interjects, kindness? And then the voice in the receiver confirms, yes, for sending us the cure for Cadena flu. The Archbishop slowly puts down the receiver, and the room falls silent. Everyone is shocked by what they have heard. The Archbishop listens to the receiver in amazement. It turns out that the cure was prepared secretly with the support of the White Tower, and he is thanked. He grins with relief when he hears that there are no side effects, and asks when the next batch can be expected. Meanwhile, in flashbacks, the mage informs him that the decision is up to the Archbishop, but it's clear between the lines that the choice was rigged. The Archbishop happily promises to send the second batch as soon as it is ready, and thanks him for his cooperation. After hanging up, he turns to Oscar and asks with a slight smile, Oscar Crushen, is this your work? Oscar stiffly interrupts the accusation, stating that the actions do not violate the law, which causes anger and confusion in the representative of the competitors. He reproaches him for his ignorance of the law, especially military law, and asks him a direct question, which he clearly tries to evade. In his thoughts, Oscar recalls the events of 20 years ago and wonders how quickly everyone has forgotten what happened then. He recalls the horrors of the war against the demons and says that the deadliest weapon in that war was pandemic. Despite the efforts of the mages, the bureaucracy was too slow, people were dying while the FDA was swayed to approve drugs. Oscar recalls that the Emperor personally added an amendment to the law pertaining to emergency treatment. He explains that under certain conditions, actions are not subject to FDA oversight, which elicits a strong reaction in the audience. The law considers war not only battles, but also revolutions and disasters above B-class, which finally puts an end to the controversy. The Cadena plague is classified as a B-class disaster, which means no FDA laws apply. One of Azure Tower's representatives panics and declares that they too can supply the cure if allowed. The Archbishop coldly parries that they don't understand the situation. After all, the cure has already arrived and the race is over. He adds that in Lord Vince's eyes it is the White Tower that is presented as the savior, and he cannot refute that. Realizing a loss, one of the mages offers to lower the price, but this provokes anger. The Archbishop, with his fist pounding on the table, resents the attempt to bribe his reputation, and the interlocutor panics and recoils. The Archbishop, enraged by his attempts to justify himself, orders him to leave the room immediately and not say another word. The Azure Tower mages silently leave, not hiding their irritation and humiliation. One of them throws a threatening phrase in Oscar's direction, promising that he will pay for everything. Oscar calmly remarks that he has already registered a patent for the cure and vaccine with the palace. The threat becomes meaningless, and he mockingly adds that if Azure Tower wants to sell the cure, let them pay the fee to the White Tower, or they'll have to throw it away. Anger rips through the Azure Tower mage, but he holds back, though his gaze is full of rage. He walks away with his fists clenched and his cloak fluttering behind him, each step carrying the weight of defeat. Bowing, he bids the Archbishop a discreet farewell, receiving a short cold in return. Only Oscar and his ally remain in the room, glancing around after what has happened. Suddenly, Oscar feels something strange, as if there was a subtle magical fluctuation in the air. Oscar feels a slight stirring, an unfamiliar odor immediately caught his attention. The man bows his head with a cold expression, leaving behind a strange sensation. A plume of mint scent wafts through the air, as if a refreshing breeze had just swept through the room. Oscar stands in a daze, unable to realize why the smell seems so familiar. He remains in front of the closed doors, silent, while somewhere in the distance someone's laughter sounds, as if mocking him. Oscar thanks politely and sits down, as if only now the real game begins. He gets right down to business and names the price, mentioning how much the others were asking, 2 million. A subtle grin appears on his face, which clearly hides something more. With an innocent look, he raises 5 fingers and names the price of 5 million. The Archbishop laughs nervously, He clearly wasn't expecting such a move. The morning in the White Tower begins with surprise. Someone shouts after receiving an unexpected document. A check for 10 million dumbfounds everyone. No one can believe their eyes. Oscar confirms the amount calmly, as if it were nothing, causing a storm of emotion. He is greeted with hugs and praise. His allies rejoice, recognizing his genius. Even the elderly man in the green robe cannot hide his surprise. Not even the Archbishop has offered so much. One of Oscar's allies declares that there were still additional fees, putting the Archbishop on edge. Oscar looks at him with a slight chuckle, clearly enjoying the situation and taking his time to explain what these additional fees are.